let's talk about one of the biggest, most glaring contradictions at the heart of the American Revolution. How could a nation be founded on this powerful cry for freedom from tyranny, while at the same time holding almost a fifth of its people in chains? And here's the thing, this isn't some modern critique we're projecting back in time. People were saying it loud and clear as it was all happening. Just listen to this. In 1774, the celebrated poet Phillis Wheatley, who had been enslaved herself, put it so perfectly. She basically said, "You don't need to be a genius to see the hypocrisy here." And that quote, right there, just perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack. All right, so let's dive into that contradiction, because it wasn't some minor detail people overlooked. No, it was this massive, unavoidable paradox that everyone was grappling with in real time. I mean, think about it. You had these two stories running side by side. On one hand, you've got the patriot cause with all this incredible, inspiring language about liberty, natural rights, and freedom from tyranny. But on the other hand, you have the American reality, the brutal system of chattel slavery, where 1 in 5 people were considered property, all propped up by this rigid racial hierarchy. The two just don't add up. So you have to ask, who was pointing this out? Well, we're going to zoom in on two absolutely remarkable figures who looked this contradiction square in the eye. But for some reason, their voices have often been kind of pushed to the margins of American history. Let me introduce you to Phillis Wheatley and Lemuel Haynes. Wheatley's story is just unbelievable. Kidnapped from West Africa, enslaved in Boston, and somehow becomes one of the most famous poets of her day. Then there's Haynes, born in Connecticut, abandoned as a baby, who grows up to fight as a Minuteman in the Revolution. And what ties them together? Well, they were both formerly enslaved, they were both deeply committed Calvinists, and they became two of the founding voices of the Black literary tradition. But here's the crazy part. For all of their brilliant work, their ideas, this amazing mix of faith and politics, have been almost completely overlooked in the mainstream story of the Revolution. It's like when historians have written about the religious ideas of that time, Black voices either get left out entirely or they're treated like a little side note. And that's a huge miss, because you can't understand the era without them. So how did they build their arguments? Well, this is what's so fascinating. They used the very tools of the culture that enslaved them, theology and philosophy, to challenge it from within. For them, faith wasn't just about personal comfort. It was a weapon. It was an intellectual battleground. Now, okay, let's address the cynical question that always comes up. Were they just parroting the religion that was forced on them? There's this idea of ventriloquism, that enslavers were just using religion as another form of control, essentially putting words in the mouths of the enslaved. But that's not what was happening here. There's a much better way to think about it, and it's called noetic agency. It's a fancy term, but the idea is simple and powerful. It's the ability to own your own mind, to have your own beliefs and intellectual commitments, even when your body isn't free. So ventriloquism is passive, right? It's just mimicking to survive. It's externally controlled. But noetic agency, that's active. That's a deep, internal, spiritual conviction. Wheatley and Haynes weren't just repeating sermons. They were taking Calvinist theology, making it their own, and turning it into a powerful platform for protest. And they were doing this while facing some seriously intense intellectual racism. I mean, just get a load of what Thomas Jefferson wrote about Wheatley. He basically admits, sure, religion might have made her a decent person, but it couldn't possibly have made her a real poet. He's literally dismissing her genius because of his racist worldview. But Wheatley's own poetry just completely demolishes that idea. In this poem, she's speaking directly to other Africans. And look at that word she uses, impartial. The Savior is impartial, and through him, you, Africans, can be sons and kings and priests to God. That is a radical claim of spiritual equality flying right in the face of guys like Jefferson. And that really gets us to the absolute core of their argument. They were calling for a better, more consistent, more honest version of liberty, and it was all built on the foundation of their faith. You see, a lot of the patriots kind of assumed that God was automatically on their side. But Wheatley and Haynes came along and said, not so fast. They argued that God's blessing on this new country wasn't guaranteed. It was conditional. It depended on whether or not America was actually going to pursue justice for everybody. And Wheatley did not hold back. In this letter from 1774, look at what she does. She calls the American patriots modern Egyptians. In the Bible, the Egyptians are the slave masters. She completely flips the script. She's saying, you think you're the oppressed ones? No. The real oppressed people here, the ones who truly pant for deliverance, are the enslaved Africans. Lemuel Haynes did something just as powerful in his essay, Liberty Further Extended. He went right to the source, the Bible. He quotes the book of Acts, where it says God made of one blood all nations, and he uses that to argue that the entire institution of slavery is fundamentally illegal in God's eyes. It's unchristian, period. So let's just lay it all out. For many Anglo-patriots, God's providence meant God's on our team. For Wheatley and Haynes, it meant God's favor depends on whether you do the right thing. For the Patriots, liberty was often a freedom for white colonists. For Wheatley and Haynes, it was a universal right for every single human. And maybe the biggest difference of all, where many saw sin as a personal, individual problem, they pointed to the entire system of slavery and called it out as a massive societal sin. So when you put it all together, what they were doing wasn't just a critique of their time, it was really a prophetic warning about the future of America.
I think the best way to describe their stance is something called critical patriotism. It's this idea that you can truly believe in the ideals of your country, you can love the vision of liberty and justice, while at the same time relentlessly calling it out when it fails to live up to those very ideals.
And there's this one story that captures it all perfectly. In 1775, Phyllis Wheatley writes a letter to none other than General George Washington. She praises him and the great cause of liberty, and you can feel her hope that maybe, just maybe, the most powerful slave owner in the colonies will see the light and apply these revolutionary ideas to everyone. So what happens? Washington writes back. He's polite, he says he likes her poetry, and he says absolutely nothing about liberty or slavery. Total silence. And that silence is just deafening. And that, right there, is their legacy. Their whole project, this blend of theology and politics, was a caution. It was a warning about the incredible danger of trying to build a new country on what they saw as a lie, a fictional foundation of freedom. And so they leave us with a question. The same one they were asking more than 2 centuries ago, and a question that, you could argue, we're still wrestling with today. What are the consequences? What happens when a nation is built on a fictional foundation of freedom? That's definitely something to think about.